Imagine two people living in the same city, shopping at the same stores, paying for the same basic needs, yet somehow one of them consistently pays more for almost everything. The difference is not always income, intelligence, or even effort. Often, the difference is liquidity. When money is tight, every decision becomes short-term, reactive, and expensive in ways that are easy to overlook in the moment. What seems like a simple lock of money often behaves more like a hidden tax on daily life. The idea that being broke is expensive may sound counterintuitive at first, yet when we look closely at everyday systems, the pattern becomes surprisingly clear. When someone has limited cash reserves, they lose access to time, flexibility, and choice. These three factors quietly shape financial outcomes over long periods. A person with financial breathing room can delay purchases, compare prices, and avoid urgency, while someone under pressure must solve today's problem immediately, even if the solution quietly costs more over time. Psychologists often describe this condition as scarcity mindset, though the term can be misleading if interpreted as a personality trait rather than a situational response. When resources feel limited, the brain prioritizes immediate relief over long-term optimization. This is not irrational behavior, it is a cognitive adaptation designed to handle urgent constraints. However, modern financial systems are structured in ways that frequently penalize this kind of urgency. Consider a simple, everyday scenario involving transportation. A person with savings can maintain a reliable car, schedule preventative repairs, and replace worn components before they fail. Maintenance costs are predictable and spread over time. A person without that buffer may delay repairs until something breaks unexpectedly. The immediate repair is then more expensive, often urgent, and sometimes accompanied by secondary costs such as towing, missed work hours, or temporary transportation alternatives. The original delay did not save money, it merely postponed a larger expense. A similar pattern appears in housing decisions. When finances are tight, moving quickly into the first available rental may feel necessary, even if the lease terms are less favorable. Deposits, short notice fees, and limited negotiating power gradually accumulate into higher total housing costs. Over long periods, these small differences compound into significant financial divergence between households that appear similar on the surface. Mathematically, the mechanism is subtle but powerful. Imagine two individuals facing a $600 unexpected expense. One has an emergency buffer and pays the amount directly. The other must rely on short-term borrowing or delayed payments. Even modest interest rates or fees introduce a compounding layer that slowly expands the original cost. Over time, repeated small financial shocks interact with interest structures, gradually amplifying the total burden. Another quiet mechanism involves purchasing power. Larger purchases often unlock lower per-unit prices, whether for groceries, utilities, insurance, or household supplies. Someone with cash flexibility can buy in bulk, take advantage of seasonal discounts, or wait for price drops. Someone operating paycheck to paycheck must buy in smaller increments at higher per-unit cost simply because timing options are limited. The price difference is rarely dramatic in a single transaction, yet repeated thousands of times over years, it forms a measurable gap. Behavioral economics helps explain why these patterns persist even when people recognize them. When cognitive bandwidth is occupied by immediate financial decisions, fewer mental resources remain available for long-term planning. Researchers sometimes call this bandwidth tax, where constant problem-solving around short-term needs consumes attention that might otherwise support strategic decisions. In other words, the financial pressure itself becomes a barrier to the kind of thinking that might relieve it. This dynamic is not new. Historical records from earlier economic periods reveal similar patterns. During the high inflation environment of the 1970s, households with access to savings could shift money into assets that adjusted with inflation or prepay certain expenses. Households without that flexibility often experienced rising prices in real time with little ability to hedge or delay consumption. The same economic forces existed for everyone, yet the outcomes differed depending on financial buffers. From a systems perspective, many economic structures unintentionally reinforce this divide. Late payment fees, overdraft penalties, high-interest short-term credit products, and inflexible billing cycles all interact with liquidity constraints. None of these mechanisms individually creates financial hardship, yet together they create an environment where limited cash flow increases the probability of encountering additional costs. Importantly, recognizing this system is not about assigning blame or creating pessimism. Instead, it reframes financial stress as a structural interaction between human psychology and institutional design. When people understand that some costs emerge from timing, liquidity, and system mechanics rather than purely personal decisions, the conversation around money becomes more analytical and less emotional. Over time, even small buffers can gradually change how these systems interact with a person's life. A modest emergency reserve, for example, does not eliminate financial challenges, but it can interrupt the chain reaction of urgency that often leads to higher long-term costs. The shift is less about dramatic lifestyle changes and more about slowly increasing flexibility in decision-making. Seen through this lens, the phrase "being broke is expensive" becomes less of a slogan and more of a structural observation about how modern financial systems operate. Liquidity creates options, and options influence prices, timing, and psychological pressure. Understanding that relationship does not instantly change someone's circumstances, but it can change how financial decisions are interpreted and approached. In the end, money is not only about how much enters a household each month, it is also about the timing of expenses, the ability to delay decisions, and a psychological space required to think beyond the next bill. When those elements begin to expand, even gradually, the invisible costs attached to scarcity begin to loosen their grip.